The budget that we're passing today focuses on affordability in the city, addressing homelessness, increasing public safety, building community between one another, and also fiscal responsibility.
I don't feel like celebrating. We're looking at a deficit next year. We simply cannot continue to live in this constant state of self-imposed deficit.
Well, some different perspectives there from the Seattle City Council on the budget passed late last week. Budget Committee Chair Dan Strauss with some cautious optimism. Councilmember Maritza Rivera doesn't feel like celebrating. Well, on this podcast, we are celebrating that deliberations are finally over so we can break down where all the dollars went. We're covering that, plus a new proposal that's popped up from Lame Duck Council President Sarah Nelson. Also, who's on Mayor-elect Wilson's transition team? Plus, how much would you pay for your own personal ferry boat? All this and more on Seattle News, Views, and Brews this week, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on the Seattle channel. The views expressed here are mine. I'm with my friend and co-host David Croman, who is the City Hall reporter for the Seattle Times. And David, it sounds like you're finally going to be able to take some time off now that the dust has settled from our local elections. What's that going to be like for you, man?
Yeah, I mean, the time off these days, I was, mostly just hanging around the house with the small children.
And there's
so
nothing wrong
plans.
with that. Okay.
But yeah, I mean, it was a pretty all-out sprint there in the last couple of months, so it feels good. Although, of course, with Katie Wilson having won, there's lots of news still to report on with transition and all that, which we'll talk about. So it's a little bit of a risk to take some time off, but I think we'll be okay.
Yeah, no vacation goes unpunished. You know that as well as I do. Thank you. Thank you, David. And thanks also to our background noise sponsor, City Grind Espresso on the first floor of City Hall. Thanks also to all the patrons of the show, paid patrons. You're pretty cool. Morty, Linda, here's looking at you. If you can, folks, please consider supporting the show, starting at just $5 a month. It works out to just a little more than $1 an episode there. You get access to Patrons First podcast. We've got one of those coming up. Also, your very own decal. What a score. Plus, we're very close to announcing a date for the Patrons Appreciation event at City Hall. I'm going to keep you posted on that. But please, head to Patreon online, support Seattle News, Views, and Brews. Thanks also for watching this podcast on Converge Media. The video version is on Converge Wednesday nights at 7. All right, let's do this thing. Time for Right Here, Right Now. Well, David, I just wanted to start with the budget to put a nail in the coffin here. You wrote about this for the Seattle Times. The budget close to $9 billion this year, about a 7% increase from last year. And the council really didn't have a lot of room in terms of trying to put in some different items there, an uncertain economic future ahead. So I was trying to look at what did change. What priorities came out of this budget that are notable in your mind?
Yeah, there's two levels of that, which is the mayor's priorities and the council's priorities. The mayor's priority, known for a while, which is most departments either saw no or negative growth, whereas the Seattle Police Department saw $40 million in growth.
$40 million.
Which I think is reflective of his tenure as mayor. It was kind of his number one priority was to increase hiring and grow the department, and that's reflected in his final budget. As far as the council's priorities go, like you said, they didn't have a lot of wiggle room here, though. I think this is right. I think the single biggest kind of addition that they're making is close to $12 million as kind of a backstop against federal cuts, specifically those associated with homelessness and housing, because that seems to be a legitimate threat here. I think somewhere around $42 million in homelessness funding from the Department of Housing and Urban Development could be a risk. So that's kind of the biggest chunk of change here, though they put some money away in a reserve account. There's a $10 million in rental assistance, which is kind of reflective of where people see the affordable housing industry at, which is not a great place. So, we're talking about drops in a pretty large bucket here that they're negotiating over. But, you could also zoom out and talk about the way in which this budget is built and how that reflects priorities, which is basically the only reason there's any money to spend and not massive cuts is because of new taxes up and down. There's the payroll tax that we've known about for a long time. They re-upped the education levy, which is a property tax. They put in place a new sales tax for public safety, and they raised taxes on the largest businesses in the city while also lowering them for the smallest. But the reason this budget works is because of new taxes, which to some members of City Hall sat better than with others.
Yeah, and looking at that, I was talking about this back and forth between Councilmember Strauss and Councilmember Rivera. You got Strauss saying, hey, we can't expect to get rid of a deficit in 1 year that took 12 years to build, because we are talking about another deficit coming up next year, about $140 million. You got other voices like Councilmember Rivera saying this is nothing to celebrate. I'm looking forward here, if we could. Where do you see this budget discussion going in 2026, especially with two new council members who definitely have more of a progressive edge to them in Dion Foster, citywide position 9, Eddie Lynn, District 2? What do you think?
I think there will be more discussion about taxes, and that is pretty well guaranteed. Whether or not they'll pass, we'll see. But
Like a
I will
capital
say,
gains tax or something like that? Or
yeah, and Mayor-elect Wilson has been pretty clear about that. That if she has a mandate, it's on progressive taxes. It's kind of how she built her whole campaign, and she won. And so no one should be surprised if that's kind of one of the first things she talks about. The problem is there's not a lot of options left over other than you mentioned a capital gains tax, but there's some question about how much money that would actually bring in. It's unclear that it would be that much. You could also kind of turn up the dial on the payroll tax jumpstart. Even Mayor-elect Wilson has acknowledged that the payroll tax has probably had some effect on where Amazon and other big businesses are putting jobs. So I think there's some question about how much they'd want to fiddle with that. So I do think it's notable that Mayor-elect Wilson, in her first speech as mayor-elect, when she was essentially declaring victory, said, we're going to have to make some hard decisions about this budget. She did not rule out that there are programs that should be cut and shouldn't be funded. I don't think there is a tax source that will close a $140 million budget deficit. So barring some much better economic forecast, which, if we're being honest, I would say the reality is probably closer to the opposite, that there's a decent chance it could be a bad economic forecast.
Yeah.
But barring some massive improvement, I do think the council is eventually going to have the discussion that this whole city council promised to have and really has not had at all, which is not just trimming, not just leaving certain positions vacant, looking at whole programs and lopping them off the budget. Eventually, it feels like that is where this has to end up, because the city so far kind of barely balances the budget year in and year out.
Yeah.
And then the next year, they do the whole thing all over again.
Yeah, and just one last touch on the budget here. There was one piece the council was saying, all right, we want to protect this investment in reducing graffiti and cleaning up graffiti around the city. We also want to protect this money with a proviso. So basically, hey, we're spending this money, the mayor can't take it away, a proviso on encampment removals. And that one jumped out at me too, because I know Katie Wilson has been a big supporter of sweeps. She has some nuanced views on that, though. Can you talk about that encampment removal piece? I'm wondering how much a point of friction that's going to be between the council and the mayor going forward. What do you think?
Yeah, it's specifically around the mayor's unified care team, which is basically the team that is responsible with doing outreach and in a lot of cases removing encampments. I think on its surface, sure, it sounds like a point of conflict, and I think it's not a coincidence that this council put these provisos on. I think they anticipate some kind of conflict with Mayor-elect Wilson on this. As you said, I do think her views here are a lot more nuanced than certainly the Herald campaign was trying to convey. She did an endorsement interview with the Democratic Socialists of America chapter in Seattle, and they were pushing her super hard to say, I won't ever do sweeps, and she wouldn't do it. She wouldn't say that. She is somebody who has been pretty open about, my goal here is to do everything we can to steer people towards treatment or shelter or whatever it might be. Yeah. But the reality is I can't abide an encampment out in front of a light rail station or in a park. And so, I didn't ask her about this specifically, but she did go on Erica Barnett and Sandeep Kaushik's Seattle Nice podcast, and they did ask her about it. And she downplayed this as a conflict. She said, I think there's room to work here. I don't think that there's actually that much difference philosophically between myself and the council. And she didn't see this as some kind of affront to her agenda necessarily.
Got it. Looking forward to talking a little bit more about Mayor-elect Wilson in a minute here, but I did want to touch on another piece of Seattle City Council news that might have snuck past your radar last week, folks. Outgoing Council President Sarah Nelson wants the council to pass an ordinance to restrict City Hall access for political consultants. She wants them to register with the city like lobbyists. This stems from outgoing Mayor Bruce Harrell's move this year to bring in his campaign advisor, Christian Sinderman, into the mayor's office for 3 years as a city-paid consultant. Sinderman, of course, was also a consultant for Dion Foster, who voters chose over Nelson in the November election. And Nelson said this made her interaction with the mayor a bit challenging, meaning, is this somehow going to be used against me in the campaign, etc.? David, you wrote about this for the Times, and my question is this political sour grapes, or do you think there's merit to what Council President Nelson is asking for?
I think it might be a little bit of both, frankly.
Okay.
I mean, there's a reason why, Jim and I wrote about the agreement, the setup between Christian Sinderman and Mayor Harrell in the first place, because that was a unique and a little odd relationship that I think raised a lot of eyebrows in City Hall, which is, he wasn't fully a city employee. He still had a lot of fingers in the consulting world, but was acting essentially as if he was a full-time worker in the office. And that, it was not illegal. They reported it. So it wasn't that they were necessarily trying to hide anything, but it just had this feeling of what is the driving motivation within the mayor's office? Is it to get experts in who know the best way to enact policy and govern a city, or is it to craft a mayor's office that is best suited to reelect Mayor Bruce Harrell? So there are interesting questions here. This legislation from Sarah Nelson, she says it's not sour grapes. It has the feel a little bit of that because, as you mentioned, she just lost to one of Christian Sinderman's clients. I think the other piece here is, I think this legislation, as it's written right now, would affect pretty much only Christian Sinderman.
I see.
In this particular context. Although perhaps it could have broader implications that I'm not fully understanding. But it is clearly written to target the sort of agreements that Harrell had with Christian Sinderman. And so, in that sense, does it enact some kind of massive change within City Hall? I'm not sure. Again, I haven't thought through all the possible implications of it. On the other hand, I do think there's probably some merit to having an accounting of how many political operatives are functioning and working within city government. Because I'm not saying that their motives are bad necessarily, but it does kind of build in the desire to see someone reelected and the desire to run City Hall properly. I think there's a pretty good faith debate to be had around whether or not those are the same thing. Some people would say yes. I don't know that I would, though, necessarily. And in that sense, I think that to a certain extent, it makes a little bit of sense to have an accounting of political consultant work in the city of Seattle.
Well, do you think the council is going to support it? Just briefly on that. We've got some new faces coming in soon. I know Eddie Lynn's going to be coming right on board in December. What are your thoughts?
I think it's a big ask in a short period of time. I think if it doesn't pass before the end of the year, I would be surprised if it passed next year because, if I'm a new council person, particularly if I'm Dion Foster, whose consultant helped me get elected. I don't know that this would be my first priority. And, honestly, the thing that I think got Sarah Nelson in trouble the most as a council president is prioritization. What was the most important thing to be doing in that moment? I think some of the criticisms toward her were that she would get distracted with fights that she was not elected necessarily to pick. And I think this next council is going to be aware of that. And so my guess would be they will not eagerly take up a political consultant bill as their first action. That said, I could see this council, a lot of them respect Council President Nelson and are probably sad to see her go. And I could see this council making a push to pass it as her kind of, last wish before she goes out the door.
Yeah, and with Harrell out of office, it's an interesting time. So,
though it would have to get at least 6 votes because I'm sure Harrell's team was quite blunt about how they felt about this legislation, which was badly. And they basically called her a political sore loser. So I'm fairly sure he would veto it. So it would need 6 votes. Can they get those in a month? I don't know.
Yeah, that's going to be tight for sure. All right, well, coming up, the transition team that Mayor-elect Wilson is bringing in and her willingness to talk to President Trump himself. What does this say about our new mayor? More details next on Now Hear This. Well, we are learning more every passing week about our mayor-elect, Katie Wilson, who is assembling a transition team comprised of, a wide range of people, including some people who served on a committee that was out to make sure she wouldn't get elected. When I spoke with her a few weeks ago at a debate on the Seattle channel, she explained that her approach to team building has been consistent throughout her working life.
The job of the mayor is about leadership. It's about assembling a team of people who have the highest competence and integrity, keeping them oriented and motivated around a common vision for our city's future. And that is exactly what I have spent my career doing.
David, we have touched on this over the past couple weeks, but I wanted to break it down as far as we could on who is on Wilson's transition team, at least to start this off here. Certainly, a lot of progressive voices are there. Tiffany McCoy from House Our Neighbors, a leading voice for social housing in Seattle. But then you have some people you could see as political adversaries of Katie Wilson. You've reported on this for the Seattle Times. How would you describe this team?
I'd say it pretty well spans the gamut of Seattle politics. Maybe not fully towards the Sarah Nelson lane, but it's a pretty wide representation of Seattle politics, which is, as you mentioned, Tiffany McCoy really is a progressive stalwart, has been for a long time. You have Karen Estevanin, who is the head of Protect 17, which is, they were the first union to back
Yep.
Katie Wilson. But then you have voices like Brian Surratt and Andres Mantilla, who are both alums of Mantilla of the Durkin administration and Nichols administration, and Surratt of the Murray administration. So
Yeah.
these are City Hall veterans. They have a lot of fingers in a lot of pots. They're pretty well connected to the business community. I
Yeah.
think at least Surratt on the board of the Downtown Seattle Association. And Mantilla used to work for, as you mentioned, C. Spain East Strategic, and Tim Cease, whose firm that is, was the organizer of the PAC to defeat Katie Wilson.
Right.
Mantilla wasn't working for him when that was going on.
Oh, okay.
So, there's not direct overlap. But the fact is he does come from that world. And I
Right.
think that tells you something about how she wants to govern, which is that if you read the national headlines about who she is, which is radical socialist,
Sure.
Mamdani, whatever, however you want it to be. So far, that has not been reflected in the steps that she's been taking. She appears to be making good on her promises to include a broad swath of voices.
Yeah.
Of course, she has allies and friends in Tiffany McCoy, and we'll see some more of those people. But I didn't know that she had a connection to Brian Surratt before
Right.
this. And so the fact that she's bringing him into this, and I've heard grumblings that he might have a pretty significant role in her administration. We'll see about that. That tells me that she is interested in having a broad collection of different perspectives in her administration.
Yeah, and you wrote about this too. Mayor-elect Wilson was telling you she's willing to talk to anyone, including President Trump, which might induce some pearl clutching out there, I'm sure. But there you have it. And we have discussed this earlier on the podcast. This isn't a situation where she's not even engaging with business voices in Seattle, which some local leaders have done in the past, not coming in looking for a fight necessarily. I wanted to talk about this because this really sounds great, but then I'm also wondering how much of this equanimity will be tested with her first major policy proposal, whatever that might be. Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, it'll be tested instantly.
Yeah, right.
And this is the easy part right now, which is everyone can kind of dream on what sort of mayor she will be, including her. Once the rubber meets the road, there's going to be knockdown, drag out fights. But that's always the case with mayors, and I do think it's notable that in some ways it's not, to me, so much about how the office will unfold or how her administration will unfold. It's more of a marker of what a different era we're in than the last time we had a mayor's race. Emilorena Gonzalez, who for years was kind of an ally of business and
Sure.
was seen as pretty mainstream, came into her race as this, trying to be this firebrand progressive. And it was just this period when, like, if you were not my friend, I was going to block you out.
Yes.
People were, any sort of association with business or the chamber or Amazon was just seen as this negative thing.
Right.
And that's just not the case anymore. And I think if you're, I talked to John Scholes of Downtown Seattle Association about this, and
Right.
of course he expects that there's going to be fights. But, if you are somebody who did not support Katie Wilson and supported Brees Harrell, this is about as good as you can hope, which is,
Yeah.
To put it crudely, that Katie Wilson's going to stab me in the front, if not the back, which is, I might disagree vehemently with what she wants to do, but at least for now, and we'll see how long this lasts, there's a sense that she's going to let you know how she's going to be. And when there's going to be a disagreement, she will tell you, hey, there's going to be a disagreement. And I think that has been a frustration in the past of some people in the business world, which is people they thought used to be allies or someone that they could work with. I think Gonzalez is the best example of this.
Yeah.
This feeling like they quietly kind of turned against them and didn't really have an upfront conversation. So again, things get hard on day one in a way that they are not right now. And we'll see how long this lasts. But for now, she is not talking the 2020 era language of Seattle progressives by any stretch.
Right. Very good point there. Another transition story to talk about here, this coming from KUOW. Erica Evans, our incoming city attorney in Seattle, says she did not receive a call or any kind of acknowledgement from outgoing city attorney Ann Davison that Evans won the election, and she did by 35 points. I know from hosting a debate with them, David, Evans really came after Davison. Evans had visual props, the whole thing. It was pretty big time. But this no acknowledgement thing is a little surprising to me. What do you think that means?
I don't know. I was surprised by it, too, because, the mayor's race was pretty nasty at times. And yet both of them had quite cordial, gracious things to say about each other when
Mm-hmm.
the final results were there, all set. And this goes beyond decorum too, which is you really do need the cooperation of the outgoing person to help the new people come in. Because, however well-intentioned or intelligent or smart or whatever,
Yeah.
it's a steep learning curve. It doesn't matter who you are.
Right.
It's a tough transition to take over an office as significant as the city attorney's office.
Yep.
And so you really do need the outgoing person to show you,
Yeah.
where, show you the ropes, show you what files are kept in which cabinets and that sort of thing. And,
Right. Evans
without
Evans
that-
did work for the city attorney's office before under Pete Holmes, but please keep going.
Right. But, 4 years is a long time. There's going to be active litigation that carries over from one administration to the next. So,
Yep.
The cabinets are perhaps a metaphor, but there's a lot that they will need to catch up on and know about, and a lot of stuff that is quite secretive. There's all this attorney-client privilege stuff that you could not learn about what kind of work the city attorney is doing by just reading public documents. You would need to be read in on this stuff, and they, the KUWP said that there was a deputy helping them, but that's not the same as having Ann Davison help you. And I don't know. I hope it's some kind of misunderstanding, because that's not how this works. It's terrible. It's painful to lose. And even if someone said really nasty things about you, denying a smooth transition is not good for the city and would only be reflective of kind of someone's personal pain. And frankly, that doesn't particularly matter when you're talking about the most important law office in the city.
Yeah, for real on that one. What kind of job do you see Erica Evans doing as city attorney? I know she talked a lot about we're going to roll back the stay out of drug areas, the stay out of areas of prostitution, the soda and soap laws. She doesn't think those are going to work. She wants to bring back community court. She's got a lot of different plans here. Talk to me just roughly about her approach. What do you think we're going to see?
Yeah, I think some of the initiatives of Davison will be rolled back. I always hesitate in some ways when we're talking about this, because the thing that we have to remember is, for everything that Ann Davison said she wanted to do differently, she did do a lot differently. She filed more cases than Pete Holmes did, but it did not really lead to more prosecutions, because the system itself is kind of a bottleneck. There's the ability to move cases through Seattle Municipal Court and get people speedy trials and, get blood work back.
Yeah.
There's just a lot, I think, that needs to be dealt with before you kind of, no matter what Eric Evans wants to do as far as pacing goes, it's going to get stuck somewhere.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
And so that, in some ways, to me, is kind of priority one as far as when you're talking about prosecutions. Which is figure out how to make this system actually work. Right. Because it just doesn't really work that well right now. So, but then, beyond that, I think it's going to be a question of prioritization. Mm-hmm. How hard do you work to divert people? How closely are you working with LEAD? Mm-hmm. What is the shape of your community court? Mm-hmm. There's always, prioritization. What kind of message are you sending to police officers as far as what sorts of cases are most likely to be prosecuted? That sort of thing. And then, the civil side, I think, is important too. What sort of proactive lawsuits do you bring? Pete Holmes brought a lawsuit against Monsanto that said a lot about who he was. Ann Davison brought a lawsuit against Kia and Hyundai for not securing their cars. That said a lot about who she was. So that'll be another piece is what kind of proactive litigation does Erica Evans end up bringing?
Yeah, there's a lot more focus on the civil side than people realize with the city attorney's office. That's for sure. All right, well, coming up, how much would you pay for your very own ferry boat? Don't answer just yet. Have we got a deal for you? Selling the state's decommissioned ferry boats, well, it's not going quite as planned. More coming up on What's Next. Well, David, my ferry riding friend, I saw this story and I just thought of you, my man. The state of Washington is trying to sell to the highest bidder 2 of its retired state ferries. This was in the Washington State Standard. You've got the decommissioned 144-car Hayak, the 87-car Clahalia on the market. Political intrigue here. An Ecuadorian company was trying to figure out this purchase last year to bring the ferries to South America and scrap them there. But there was a problem with the tugboat. The crew ended up getting deported. Yikes. First question, David. I've ridden on these boats, but you have a lot more than I have. Give me a dollar value of what you would pay for them. Full honesty, please.
$0.
Yeah.
These things are in disarray. I'm sure they're dirty.
Yeah.
The Hayak was docked in Kingston for years. It's not there anymore.
Yeah.
And it just became, let's say, a restroom for cormorants. There
Oh
were
dear.
just so many cormorants that would line up on the edges, and it just smelled, you could not pay me to take one of these ferry boats.
Good. Well, larger issue though, it's tough to sell these things. They're stripped down. They'd have to be rehabbed quite a bit to get back in service of any sort. And the horn from the Hayak, I understand, is at Climate Pledge. They actually sound it when the Kraken score a goal. That's cool, but the boat doesn't have a horn. I read that maybe if the sale doesn't come through, they'd have to be recycled somehow, which would cost a lot of money, work that wouldn't even be worth the scrap metal. Seems like kind of a thorny problem to actually decommission and somehow get rid of these boats.
Yeah, if it was easy, they would have done it by now.
Yeah, right.
It seems like I don't know that much about the metal market and how valuable, how much you could get out of these. It does, again, doesn't pass the eye test for me as something that you would want carrying large numbers of people anymore.
Well, maybe you could really sell it. You could really sell it as it's got this cormorant infused scent to it. Maybe that would be an incentive there.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I don't know. So I don't know what you could get. Apparently this Ecuadorian guy thought he could get something out of it by scrapping it. I don't even know what it's made out of.
Right.
So I don't know what the value of is in just the pure scrap, but it seems to me that would be the only kind of real use of it, would just be to boil it down into something else and reuse it. But I don't know. There's that boat that's parked on Lake Union that is a pretty popular wedding venue. I don't remember what that one's called, but I don't know. Maybe it could be something like that.
Yeah. I know a few of these have been floating venues or whatever else, but as you say, there would be a lot of cleanup work that would be needed on both of these. All right, it is time to wrap up. And David, I actually had to ask this as a lightning round question during a mayoral debate this fall. I'm going to aim it at you this week. If you had to name a ferry boat, one of these majestic vessels that cross Puget Sound, what would you name it?
Oh, wow. That's putting me on the spot.
Big time.
Well, I was let's see. What's a great, I guess is there a Tahoma boat already? I don't know if there's a Tahoma.
I think there is a Tahoma.
Is there a Tahoma?
Yeah, kind of Mount Rainier, the real name of the mountain. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like the Olympics don't have good representation on in the ferry fleet. So maybe, Olympus.
Love it.
Or something like that. Let's go with Olympus. It's, both a local mountain and, kind of godlike.
Indeed. Mm-hmm. Yeah, very tough to get on top of. I don't know how that's going to play with people on that. And I got to tell, when Harrell and Wilson were asked this question, they had absolutely nothing. Somebody, yeah, I know, it was crazy. Somebody yelled out "sockeye" in the audience, and boy, were they grateful. It was just a very, very interesting moment there. Well, I know that, David, you are paying $0 for those, so that's the most important part of all of this. Thank you so much, David. Thanks to everybody listening to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. If you want to be a patron and support the show, love to have you. Go to Patreon online. Find Seattle News, Views, and Brews. The pledges start out at just $5 a month. Thank you for the support. You can hear this podcast on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen. Thanks also for watching on Converge Media. We'll see you next time. Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2025.